I was standing in our garage, surrounded by half-emptied moving boxes that I had promised Julia I'd clear out 2 months ago, when I found it. It wasn't even hidden, really. Just sitting there, in a plastic tote under a pile of folded beach towels, like it belonged there all along. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just killing time while she was out for the day at what she claimed was her sister's baby shower. I say claimed, because Julia has a way of making even the simplest sentences feel like a performance, and lately, every word out of her mouth sounded like she was trying to win a damn Oscar. "It's going to be a whole thing," she said that morning, tying her hair up into a loose bun. "Sarah's friend from college is flying in. There's a cake shaped like a diaper, and it's all pink and white. I'm just warning you." I nodded and smiled like a husband's supposed to, kissed her on the cheek, and told her to have fun. But the moment the garage door opened and I watched her car disappear down the street, I couldn't stop thinking about how she'd taken her best perfume, the one she usually reserved for anniversary dinners or weddings. And not just that, she'd changed her outfit 3 times before settling on one that was definitely not shower with the girls material. So there I was, in a pile of my own disorganized junk, trying to convince myself I wasn't spiraling into some insecure pit of suspicion, when I pulled out a cardboard shoebox I didn't recognize. The box was light, barely filled, and inside it were 4 photographs, printed ones, like the kind you get from a drugstore. I picked up the top one and stared for a solid 10 seconds before my brain could make sense of what I was seeing. It was Julia, sitting across from someone at a table in what looked like a small restaurant, maybe a diner, with her back mostly to the camera. But that wasn't what caught my attention, it was the look on her face. She was smiling, not the forced kind she gave when posing for a picture, but something softer, more private. The second photo was taken from a slightly different angle, and this time, the man she was with was more visible. Tall, wearing a navy blazer over a t-shirt, he had his hand over hers on the table. And just like that, the third photo made everything worse. It was the two of them walking out of that same place, his hand low on her back, her head tilted up toward him as if she was mid-laugh, like something he'd said was the funniest thing in the world. And then the fourth one, her getting into his car. I stood there holding those pictures like they were foreign objects, like they were props from someone else's life. It wasn't the shock that got me, not at first. It was the precision of it all. Whoever took those photos knew what they were doing. Each shot told a story I hadn't been told. Each one chipped away at the version of Julia I thought I knew. I sat down right there on a box labeled Christmas Decor and stared at the garage wall while my mind ran through every weird moment over the last few months. Every late return from work. Every time she'd rushed to take a shower before I could hug her. Every vague explanation about why she didn't want to go out anymore. The puzzle had been right in front of me, but I hadn't had the pieces until now. That afternoon, I didn't call her. I didn't even touch my phone. I sat in that garage for hours, pictures on my lap, trying to decide if I was going to pretend I hadn't found them. I thought about putting them back where I found them, zipping the tote shut, and going inside like nothing happened. But I couldn't. The images were burned into my brain. I couldn't unsee them. And I couldn't forget the fact that she hadn't even bothered to hide them well. It was like she wanted me to find them, or worse, she just didn't care if I did. When she got home later that night, I was already in bed, the house dark, the bedroom silent except for the ceiling fan ticking overhead. She crept in quietly, thinking I was asleep. I felt the bed shift as she got in, then her hand slid lightly across my back, like she was checking to see how asleep I really was. I didn't move. I just let her touch me, then turn away and settle into her pillow. Her breathing steadied after a few minutes, but mine didn't, because I wasn't asleep. And tomorrow, I was going to find out exactly where those pictures came from. The next morning, I woke up before her. I didn't even need an alarm. My body had made the decision on its own. I lay there for a while, listening to the soft sound of her breathing, feeling this dull pressure in my chest that didn't go away even when I stood up and started moving around. I went to the garage again, not because I didn't believe what I saw, but because I needed to look at the pictures one more time with the kind of eyes you only get after a night of restless thinking. They were still there, just as I'd left them, just as she had, untouched, unhidden, unashamed. I stared at them for 10, maybe 15 minutes before I carefully put them into a thick envelope and slid it into my laptop bag. I didn't have a plan yet, but I knew I couldn't sit on this much longer. I needed to figure out who the guy was, and more importantly, who the hell had taken those photos. Julia came into the kitchen around 9, wearing that gray robe she always says she hates but never throws out. She looked tired, maybe hungover, maybe not. She made coffee without saying anything and leaned against the counter like everything was normal. I sat at the table, watching her out of the corner of my eye. When she finally looked over, she gave me a smile that was supposed to look casual, but it was tight around the edges. I kept my face blank. "You sleep okay?" she asked, sipping from her mug like it was any other Sunday. "I slept," I answered, not giving her anything beyond that. She didn't push further, which told me a lot. Julia usually asked more questions when she thought something was off, but now she was playing it safe. That was a choice. Around noon, I told her I was heading to the store. I made sure to say it loud enough and with just enough detail that she wouldn't ask to come. She nodded and went back to the couch, phone in hand, already half lost in whatever lie she was probably keeping alive. I didn't go to the store. Instead, I drove to a print shop where a buddy of mine, Scott, worked. I showed him the photos, told him I needed them scanned and cleaned up, then asked if he could enhance any of the background details. He gave me a weird look at first, the kind people give when they don't want to get involved, but he owed me a favor from a job I'd helped him with last year, so he agreed. "You want me to check the metadata?" he asked, already loading the files onto his system. "Absolutely," I said, leaning in. "If you can find out what kind of camera took these, maybe even a timestamp, I'll owe you another one." While he worked, I sat on a stool and scrolled through Julia's Facebook. Nothing unusual there. Some shared memes, a couple of tagged photos, a check-in at a cafe 2 weeks ago that didn't line up with the one in the photos. I already knew she wasn't dumb enough to post anything incriminating, but I was looking for the guy's face, hoping she'd slipped up. But there was nothing. No mutual friends I didn't recognize, no strange likes or comments. She'd covered her tracks well. Too well. That's when Scott called me over. "Check this out," he said, pointing to the screen. "Whoever took these used a DSLR, definitely not a phone. Based on the metadata, they were taken 2 weeks ago. Exact timestamp is right here." I stared at the date. That weekend, Julia had said she was visiting her mom, who lives 2 hours away. She even brought back some stupid ceramic bowl she said her mom gave her for the kitchen. I remember because I'd asked her if she wanted me to install another shelf for her display crap, and she said no, she'd just swap out something older. "She wasn't where she said she was," I muttered. Scott looked at me carefully. "You think she's cheating?" "I know she is," I said quietly, tapping one of the photos. "But now I think someone else knows too." I left the shop with a USB drive and a bunch of questions I couldn't answer yet. On the way home, I stopped by Julia's sister's place. I didn't call ahead, just rang the doorbell and waited. Sarah opened the door wearing sweatpants and looked genuinely surprised to see me. "Matt? What's up?" "I just wanted to drop something off for Julia," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She said she was here yesterday for your baby shower." Sarah blinked. "Yesterday?" "No, we had the shower 3 weeks ago. She wasn't here yesterday." "Why?" I smiled, shrugged. "Just got confused with the dates." "My bad." Sarah raised an eyebrow but didn't press, and I left before I gave anything away. On the drive back, I felt something shift. The suspicion had turned into certainty, and now the need to catch her in another lie was gone. She was already exposed. I just hadn't shown her yet. What I needed now was the full picture. I had the when. I had the who, at least visually. But the why and how deep this thing ran, that was next. And for the first time in weeks, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't going to ask questions anymore. I was going to start watching. Not just her. Everyone around her. Because someone out there was watching too, and I was going to find out who. I waited 4 more days before saying anything. I didn't tell her about the pictures. I didn't mention her lie about the baby shower. I acted like nothing had changed, made dinner, cleaned up, laughed at a couple of shows with her on the couch like some idiot husband who thinks his life is still intact. She didn't even notice I was watching her differently. That was the worst part, how easy it was for her to keep pretending. She still kissed me goodnight. Still asked how my work calls went. Still showed up to the same bed every night like she belonged there. And maybe that's why I snapped the way I did. Because pretending felt worse than knowing. It happened on a Thursday night. We just finished eating. She made salmon and roasted potatoes, plated them like she was trying out for a cooking show. I remember staring at the food thinking it looked like a bribe. After dinner, she poured us each a glass of wine and started talking about some team retreat she had coming up. That's when I pulled out the envelope. "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice calm. She looked up, already halfway through a sip. Glass paused mid-air. "Okay," she said slowly. I slid the envelope across the table and leaned back in my chair. She hesitated before picking it up. I watched her face. The moment she opened it, Her eyes locked onto the top photo, and everything in her expression shifted. Her mouth tightened, her breathing changed, and when she looked up at me, I saw something she hadn't shown in weeks: fear. "Where did you get these?" she asked. "That's what you want to ask me?" I said, not raising my voice but making sure she heard every word. "Not who took them, not what I know, just where I got them?" She set the photos down, stacking them neatly like she could still control the situation by being organized. "Matt," she started, her tone suddenly soft, rehearsed. "This isn't what it looks like." I stood up and leaned both hands on the table. "Then explain it to me, Julia. Explain why you're holding hands with some guy in a restaurant 2 towns over on a weekend you said you were at your mom's. Explain why he's got his hand on your back, and why you're getting into his car. If it's not what it looks like, then make it make sense." She didn't answer right away. She just stared at the photos like she was hoping they'd disappear. "I met him a few months ago," she said finally, and her voice dropped into this low, resigned tone that pissed me off more than anything else. "At a client lunch. It wasn't supposed to be anything." I shook my head. "Don't do that. Don't act like this is something that happened to you. You didn't fall down the stairs. You scheduled this. You planned it. You lied about where you were going. You lied about your sister's baby shower. So tell me who he is and how long it's been going on." Her hands were in her lap now, gripping each other tightly, like she needed something to hold on to. "His name's Tom. He works with one of our vendors. We ran into each other a few times and then started texting. I don't even know why I let it go that far." "You do?" I said, cutting her off. "You let it go that far because you wanted to. You like the attention. You like sneaking around. And you knew I trusted you enough not to ask questions. So don't insult me by pretending this was some accident." Julia stood up, but I didn't move. She stepped around the table, now close enough that I could see the redness in her eyes starting to build. "It didn't mean anything, Matt," she said, reaching for my arm, and I pulled it away before she could touch me. "It wasn't about love or replacing you. I felt stuck. Bored. I don't know. I made a mistake." "No, Julia," I said, louder now. "For a mistake to happen, you have to slip once. This wasn't once. This was meetings, messages, lies, probably sex. This wasn't a mistake. This was a second life you built behind my back." Her face crumpled a little then, and for the first time, she looked like she might cry. I didn't care. "Did you sleep with him?" I asked. She looked down, then back up. "Yes." And that was it. I don't know why hearing it made the difference. I already knew. I saw it in the way she moved lately, the guilt she thought she was hiding. But hearing her say it still cracked something in me. I turned away and walked into the living room, trying to breathe through the pressure building in my chest. She followed me. "I stopped it," she said. "I ended it weeks ago. But you didn't tell me. You were going to keep it a secret and go on like nothing happened." "I was trying to protect what we had left," she said. "You mean what you destroyed?" She wiped her face with the back of her hand, then crossed her arms like she was trying to hold herself together. "So what now?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, staring at the wall, thinking about all the things I could say. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But none of that would fix anything. None of it would give me back the version of her I used to believe in. "I don't know," I finally said. "But you're sleeping in the guest room tonight." She moved into the guest room that night without saying anything. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to argue, just took her pillow and a few things and disappeared down the hallway like she was checking into a hotel. I sat in our bedroom with the door open, waiting to see if she'd say something before turning in, but she didn't. She walked past the door like I wasn't sitting there, like I hadn't just found out she'd been sleeping with someone else. The house went quiet after that, except for the occasional sound of her moving around in the other room, drawers opening and closing, the faint sound of the faucet. I stayed up until almost 3 a.m., not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to. There was no reason to close my eyes just to run through the same thoughts again. I'd already made up my mind about what I needed to do. The next morning, I started sorting through everything. I made a list of every shared account, every bill, every subscription, every legal detail we had tied together. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I wasn't planning to go through the official process immediately. That was too easy, too clean. I needed her to feel something first. Not just guilt, not just discomfort. She needed to feel the kind of sharp humiliation that she never expected to come from me. Because the truth is, Julia always thought I was predictable. She thought I was mild, level-headed, rational. That I'd just process everything, maybe cry a little, and eventually forgive her like a coward begging to have his marriage back. But she was wrong. I didn't want revenge just for the sake of payback. I wanted her to understand that every lie she told chipped away at a life I was still trying to build, while she was off investing her time and body in someone else. So I decided to give her the one thing she couldn't handle: exposure. Not physical, not illegal, just honest, unavoidable exposure. I printed the photos again, this time in larger format, and put them into separate envelopes. I addressed one to her parents, one to her boss, and one to her best friend Rachel. Nothing dramatic, no letters included, just the pictures. I wasn't going to explain anything. The images said enough. I dropped them off at a public mailbox 3 towns over. No return address. No fingerprints. Just quiet delivery. I timed the mailing so everything would land on a Friday, right before the weekend, when people tend to be home and checking their mail. At home, I stayed calm. She cooked dinner like everything was slowly getting back to normal. She even asked if I wanted to watch something together in the living room, and I just told her I had work to finish. She didn't argue. I think she was starting to believe that the storm had passed, that my anger was cooling off. She didn't know what I'd done. Not yet. On Friday afternoon, I saw the first sign that it had landed. Her phone rang while she was in the shower. It was her mom. I didn't answer it, just stared at the screen until it stopped. She came out 20 minutes later, towel wrapped around her hair, humming like someone without a care in the world. "Your mom called," I said without looking up from my laptop. She paused for a second. Did she say why? Nope. A few minutes later, she returned the call in the guest room. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, but I caught enough. Her voice started off casual, then dipped into confused, then defensive. She tried to talk over her mother, kept repeating things like, "I don't know how that got out," and "It's not what it looks like," which was hilarious, because it was exactly what it looked like. After about 10 minutes, she came out of the room looking pale. She didn't say anything, just went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of wine, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. An hour later, her best friend called. I watched her pace back and forth on the patio, trying to explain something to Rachel, hands waving in frustration, voice raised. When she came back in, she looked at me like she was searching for some clue on my face. "Did you tell anyone?" she asked. "About what?" She narrowed her eyes, suspicious now. "You know what?" I shrugged. "Maybe someone else followed you. Maybe Tom's got more fans than you thought." She didn't like that answer. She stormed back into the guest room and slammed the door. That night, she didn't come out. No dinner, no attempt to patch things up. Just silence. Saturday morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Her boss. Multiple missed calls. She finally picked up around noon. I only caught a few words, but it was clear that her job had been affected. Something about conflict of interest and vendor relationship concerns. She didn't come out of the room until nearly evening. When she did, she looked exhausted. Her hair was a mess, eyes bloodshot, voice flat. She stood in the doorway and stared at me. "You did this," she said. "No," I replied. "You did. I just made sure the right people knew." She didn't speak after that. She just turned around and went back to her room, shutting the door quietly this time. No drama, no begging, no tears. Just quiet. That was when I knew I'd finally taken something back. Not revenge in the way people talk about it with fire and fury, but something that cut deeper. I took away her comfort. I took away her ability to hide. And for the first time since I found those photos, I felt like I could finally breathe again. By the time Sunday night rolled around, the house had taken on a weird, unfamiliar rhythm. We barely saw each other. She stayed in the guest room most of the day, coming out only when she thought I wasn't around. I stuck to the living room, the garage, sometimes the bedroom if I needed space. We were 2 people sharing a roof, but not a life. There was no shouting, no more accusations, just quiet. I thought I'd feel satisfied after everything landed, after the packages hit, the phone calls came in, after the embarrassment finally hit her like it hit me that day in the garage, but I didn't feel anything like satisfaction. I felt like I'd won a fight I never wanted to be in. And now I had to figure out what the hell to do with all the silence. She finally spoke to me Monday morning. She came into the kitchen while I was making coffee and leaned against the counter like it was something she'd been working up to. Her face was tired, not like someone who hadn't slept, but like someone who was finally realizing everything wasn't going to just go back to normal. I didn't say anything. I didn't offer her coffee. I waited for her to talk. "Do you really think we're done?" she asked, like the last few days hadn't happened. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at her. She looked down at the floor, then back at me. I know what I did was wrong. I know I broke something between us. I let that sit for a second. "You didn't just break something, Julia. You replaced it. You didn't come home one day and tell me you made a mistake. You had weeks, months. You kept going with him even after you had chances to stop. She folded her arms, more from instinct than attitude. I ended it before you found out. That's supposed to make it better? I'm saying I knew it was wrong and I ended it. I wanted to fix this. No, you wanted to cover it. That's not the same thing. She stepped forward a bit, not too close, but enough that she thought the distance might soften me. Matt, I'm not asking you to forgive me overnight. I'm asking you to think about everything else. Everything before this. I nodded slowly. You want to talk about before this? Fine. Let's talk about the nights I made dinner because you were tired. The times I picked up your dry cleaning, the birthday surprises, the trips I planned. Let's talk about the years I trusted you. All of that was the foundation you decided to tear apart. So don't come to me with a scrapbook of memories and expect that to erase what you did. I'm not asking to erase anything, she said, and her voice cracked just slightly. I'm asking to rebuild. We can go to counseling. We can figure out what made this happen. What made this happen is you made a choice. More than once. You didn't trip into bed with someone. You organized it. You protected it. And you lied to me every single day it went on. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She didn't have anything to counter that. She stood there for a long time before finally exhaling. So what do you want to do? Divorce? Is that it? I don't know, I said honestly. But I can't live in a house with someone I don't trust. And I definitely can't sleep next to someone who lied to my face with a straight voice for weeks. I didn't want this to be permanent, she said quietly. I didn't want to lose you. Then why'd you risk it for nothing? She sat down at the table and looked at her hands. I felt invisible. I felt like we were living side by side, not together. I leaned on the counter. And you think I didn't feel that too? You think I didn't notice the distance? The difference is, I stayed. I waited. I thought it was a phase. You found a shortcut to attention, and now you're upset it didn't lead anywhere. I know, she said, still not looking at me. I know I handled it like a coward. And now you want what? Another chance? I want a conversation. I want honesty. I want to know if there's a part of you that still wants to fix it. I looked at her for a while. I didn't answer right away because I wasn't sure what the answer was. There was a part of me that wanted to avoid starting over, avoid the mess of lawyers, papers, explanations to family and friends. But that was the easy part. The hard part was knowing I'd never look at her the same again. Every touch would come with a memory. Every absence would come with suspicion. I didn't want to become a man who had to double-check his wife's explanations. You're not who I thought you were, I said finally. And I'm not going to stay just to keep pretending. She nodded. I think she expected it, maybe even respected it in a way. She stood up slowly and looked at me one last time. Then I'll start packing. And that was it. No tears. No screaming. Just two people finally understanding that whatever they had, it wasn't enough anymore. She moved out that weekend. No drama, no begging, just quiet steps back and forth from the guest room to the car. She didn't take everything. Just a few boxes, clothes, toiletries, a laptop, some books, her work files. I didn't help her pack, didn't ask where she was going, didn't ask who was helping her. I stood by the kitchen counter with a mug of coffee and watched the door open and close. She didn't cry. She looked tired but calm. I think she knew there was nothing left to argue about. We'd already said what needed to be said, and the rest didn't matter anymore. When she came back in after loading the last box, she stood near the front door for a moment and looked around the house like she was trying to memorize it. I didn't offer any parting words. She opened the door and walked out. I didn't follow her. That night, I sat on the couch and looked at the space she used to sit in. Her favorite blanket was still folded on the armrest. I didn't touch it. I just stared at it for a while, wondering how a person could spend years building something only to walk away from it like it was a hotel room they'd overstayed in. I didn't drink. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the silence she left behind. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't tragic. It was just strange, like I was visiting my own life for the first time in years. Over the next few days, I started clearing out the little things. Her slippers by the bed. Her mug from the cabinet. I threw out the empty shampoo bottles she left in the shower. I changed the sheets. I put her stuff into one closet, shut the door, and left it alone. I wasn't ready to throw everything out, but I didn't want it in my face either. People talk about healing like it's this grand process, like there's a checklist. But there's no plan. You wake up, you move through your day, and sometimes you forget for an hour until something reminds you. The way the house smells. A song in the background. The silence at dinner. Then it hits again. You sit with it, and eventually it passes. She called 3 days after she moved out. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I just wanted to see how you're doing, she said. I'm managing, I answered. You settled in? Yeah. I'm staying with Rachel for now, just until I figure things out. I didn't respond. She paused, waiting, probably hoping I'd ask something that opened a window for her. I've been thinking about everything, she continued. I keep going back to what you said, about how I made a choice. You're right. I did. I can't take that back. You can't. But I still want to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for how I became someone who could do it. I waited. It doesn't change anything. I know, she said, but I needed to say it. We hung up shortly after. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel worse. It was just another piece of the wreckage being swept away. A week later, I saw her in town. She was walking out of a cafe with a to-go cup in her hand, wearing sunglasses, dressed in a way that looked like she was trying to feel put together. She didn't see me. I didn't go over. I didn't feel the need to confront her again or avoid her either. I just observed, like I was seeing someone I used to know in a different light. It didn't hurt. It didn't stir up anything. It just felt like watching a chapter close. I told a few close friends what had happened. The ones who mattered weren't surprised, and they didn't give me the typical lines. They just listened. That was enough. One night, a friend came by with beer and pizza, and we sat on the porch talking about anything except relationships. It felt normal. That's what I needed, normal, not advice. Eventually, I called a lawyer. I didn't rush the paperwork. I let things move at a steady pace. We agreed on most things. No kids, no real disputes. We kept it clean. We didn't have a final dinner or last conversation over wine. We signed, we nodded, and that was the end. The divorce was official by the end of the month. 28 days after I found those photos. People ask sometimes if I still think about her. Of course I do. Not every day, not with longing, but with clarity. I think about the trust, how easily it was broken, how little warning I really had. I think about the way people drift, how quiet it is when a relationship dies, how the signs aren't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a series of small, ignored moments. I don't feel like a victim. I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a guy who found the truth and dealt with it the only way he knew how. And now, I sleep better. Not because I'm over it, but because I'm not pretending anymore. The pretending was the hardest part. I'm not in a rush to start over. I'm not swiping through apps or signing up for dating events. Right now, I'm learning to enjoy my own space again. My house, my routines, my time. The way things feel when no one's lying next to you and everything around you is real. And for the first time in years, I don't feel like I'm waiting for anything. I'm just living on my own terms. That's enough for now.